I'd like to call this markup to order. Today we're going to be marking up a discussion draft on the Pipeline Infrastructure and Community Protection Act, which is the reauthorization of the Pipeline Safety Act. Second bill we're going to be marking up is H.R. 2054, the Energy and Revenue Enrichment Act of 2011. The Pipeline Reauthorization Act will be introduced by the full committee chairman, Mr. Upton. As you know, we've been working with a discussion draft. This bill will reauthorize our pipeline safety law, which was last reauthorized in 2006. Chairman Upton and, in fact, all the members on both sides of the aisle and staff has done a great job in working with various interest groups in drafting this bill. Because of some recent accidents, it's imperative that we move this bill quickly to ensure that our pipelines are safe. At the same time, we must make sure that this bill does not have a lot of unintended consequences. One area that I look forward to working with Chairman Upton as well as Ranking Member Waxman and Mr. Rush and others is to address the prohibitions on state exemptions from the one-call section. Basically, this section prohibits states from allowing for any exemptions from their one-call program, which seems logical, but I think there are narrow situations that states may need flexibility for an exemption. For example, farmers annually plow their ground, so there are questions about whether a farmer needs to call before they plow based on the language in this bill or discussion draft. Another example is routine maintenance of railroads and their ability to work on their ground to maintain their rights-of-way. Questions have been brought to my attention that maybe we should work on regarding the wording of this provision so that we do not have unintended consequences. And I hope Chairman Upton and Mr. Waxman and Mr. Rush and others will work with us to perfect the language at full committee. Despite these minor concerns, this bill is a good bill and one that I hope that we can continue to move through our committee. I urge all members to work with us as we attempt to advance this bill. The second bill relates to depleted uranium tails located in Paducah, Kentucky and Portsmouth, Ohio. At those two sites, there are 60,000 14-ton canisters of depleted uranium tails. GAO recently estimated that if those tails were reprocessed and sold, that it would generate around $4 billion in additional revenue for taxpayers. However, because the Department of Energy has failed to act on this and has decided not to act, H.R. 2054 is necessary to direct the Department to move forward. The bill is really not that complicated. It initiates a 2-year pilot program to re-enrich the uranium tails, allows for the sale of that uranium to occur over 4 years so that the sale does not disrupt the uranium market, and it deposits the money into the Uranium Decontamination and Decommissioning Fund to be used for environmental cleanup. Now, there's been controversy about this bill because some people say, well, this is a sole source bill. No one has an opportunity to do it except the company located at Paducah. Well, this bill, after the initial 2-year pilot project, would go to a totally open competitive bidding process. The reason we don't do that initially is that there really is no other site in America that at this time is prepared to enrich these tails. So the reason we're trying to move the legislation, this is also directly related to jobs. There are 1,200 jobs at stake at the Paducah plant and in that surrounding area. That's not an insignificant number when you consider what our national unemployment rate is today. And I might also add that 92% of the uranium coming into America today are being used in America today at our nuclear power plants for enrichment and so forth comes from overseas, according to the Energy Information Administration. So there is concern about domestic uranium production, But I believe that this bill is balanced, and I'm sure we'll have more discussion about it, but I look forward to also marking that bill up today. And at this time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the last 12 months, a series of tragic failures has reinforced the need for stronger pipeline safety laws. Pipeline failures have occurred all around the country, from California and Montana to Michigan and Pennsylvania. We've seen natural gas pipeline explosions and ruptured oil pipelines spilling oil into rivers. We finished a legislative hearing on this topic last Thursday. Just in the last 6 days, there was a natural gas pipeline failure in Wyoming and an oil pipeline failure near Tampa, Florida. It's clearly time to update and strengthen our pipeline safety laws. After this month's hearing, there were productive bipartisan discussions on the legislation. Those discussions produced the manager's amendment that we are going to consider today. And I'd like to commend Chairman Upton and Mr. Dingell for their hard work on this bill. The manager's amendment is a good compromise and includes a number of important improvements to the initial discussion draft. I support this amendment, look forward to working with our colleagues to report this legislation out of the full committee. The other bill we're considering today is Chairman Whitfield's legislation to direct the Department of Energy to enter into a contract to enrich its depleted uranium tails so that the resulting enriched uranium can be sold on the market. During the legislative hearing on this bill, I raised a number of concerns about whether this legislation would be a good deal for taxpayers. Unfortunately, the manager's amendment suffers from the same basic problems as the original bill. This amendment gives a sole source contract to a company in the chairman's district. It also ignores other options for disposing of DOE's excess uranium that could provide more value to the taxpayer. For these reasons, I will be opposing this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. At this time, I recognize the full committee chairman, Mr. Upton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, this subcommittee takes up the very important issue of pipeline safety. The Pipeline Infrastructure and Community Protection Act of 2011 is the Energy and Commerce Committee's first step in the reauthorization of federal pipeline safety legislation, an effort that we are pursuing jointly with the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. This is a subject with long and bipartisan history, and I am pleased to be working with my friend and colleague John Dingell to jointly sponsor the legislation that we're considering today. This was truly a collaborative process with both the majority and minority that has led to a bill with a number of key improvements over the initial discussion draft. My state, our state of Michigan, is crisscrossed with many pipelines, so pipeline safety is an important issue that hits very close to home. This was especially true last year when a pipeline ruptured and caused a significant spill into a waterway into my district. And as we developed the bill, we've carefully studied the Enbridge spill in Michigan as well as other recent pipeline incidents, including the one impacting the Yellowstone River. We're learning from those experiences and focused on meaningful reform that will actually help prevent safety failures. There's no doubt that improving pipeline safety is a challenge, but it also presents an opportunity. The Energy Information Administration projects significant increases in the nation's demand for energy in the decades ahead, including liquid fuels and natural gas. Those increasing volumes will have to get their end users somehow, and by many measures, pipelines have a better safety record than any other means of energy transport. I believe that pipelines can deliver growing energy supplies to families and businesses in the years ahead, and I believe that they can do it safely. But as recent spills have shown, the status quo is not good enough, and the goal of the Pipeline Infrastructure and Community Protection Act of 2011 is to ensure a much stronger safety record in the future. Among its many provisions, the bill requires the use of automatic or remote-controlled shutoff valves. It incorporates new standards for leak detection technologies, replaces outdated safety requirements and inspection regimes with updated ones. It sets a 1-hour time limit for operators to report incidents to the National Response Center. It beefs up the number of pipeline inspectors at the Department of Transportation and increases penalties for noncompliance. In sum, we believe that the bill demands improvements in both technology and personnel that can help prevent leaks from occurring in the first place and reduce the damage if they do so. This bill is a serious bipartisan effort to reform and update our pipeline safety laws. I appreciate the bipartisan collaboration that helped produce the bill that we're considering today, and I look forward to additional improvements as we move forward. Already, the bill includes several important measures not in the original discussion draft. For example, we have added provisions setting maximum allowable operating pressures. This provision directly addresses the problem that led to the fatal pipeline explosion last year in San Bruno, California. In given the vulnerability shown by the recent Yellowstone River spill, we've included new provisions for pipelines under waterways. And this is an issue that we'll continue to examine as details of the Yellowstone spill come to light. Thanks in part to strong and consistent guidelines, pipeline safety has improved over the last couple of decades, for sure. This bill is the first step in taking that progress to a new level as we face the challenge of meeting the nation's growing demands for energy. Pipeline safety is an issue near and dear to me, but I would be remiss if I didn't also recognize the subcommittee chair, Mr. Whitfield, for his great work on the second bill that we're considering today, H.R. 2054. I appreciate his effort to address members' concerns on the issue of uranium tails, and I hope that members of the subcommittee will support the legislation, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Upton. At this time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I must commend you and the majority side for working with the minority side on the Pipeline Infrastructure and Community Protection Act to greatly improve this bill since we held our last hearing. The amendment in the nature of a substitute reflects many improvements to the draft and brings this version more into alliance with the Senate bill, which has also received bipartisan support. Mr. Chairman, I think that if we continue this, bipartisanship may become a habit of this subcommittee, and that would be a good thing, not a bad thing. Some of the highlights of the bill include Section 4, which will require PHMSA to issue regulations subjecting offshore hazardous liquid gathering lines and hazardous liquid gathering lines to the same standards as other hazardous liquid pipelines. Section 5 requires PHMSA to issue regulations requiring the use of remote control or automatic shutoff valves or equivalent technology for newly constructed transmission pipelines where economically, technically, and operationally are feasible. In fact, this bill goes a step further than the Senate bill by requiring PHMSA to conduct an analysis of a transmission line transmission pipeline operators' ability to respond to leaks in high consequence areas, including a consideration of the costs, risks, and benefits of retrofitting existing transmission pipelines with automatic or remote control shutoff valves. One area where we may continue to work on, however, is Section 8, which does not require PHMSA to ensure the public availability of industry-developed or professional organizational safety standards. However, similar to the Senate bill, Section 10 requires PHMSA to study leak detection systems and, based on that study, issue regulations requiring hazardous liquid pipelines to use leak detection systems. Again, this bill goes beyond the Senate version by also requiring those regulations to establish standards for the capability of leak detection systems. In fact, I think we should include similar language in Section 21, which requires PHMSA to conduct a comprehensive study for transporting hazardous liquids, such as diluted bitumen used for the transportation of tar sands oil, but does not include the next step of requiring PHMSA to implement new rules based off of these findings. Overall, Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased with the progress that both sides have made on this pipeline safety bill. Mr. Chairman, I do have to admit, though, in all seriousness, that I was a little surprised to find out that we were also marking up the Energy and Revenue Enrichment Enhancement Act today. In our last conversation on the bill, we had agreed to send a letter to GAO to find out the best way to move forward on the uranium sales issue to ensure that taxpayers were getting a fair deal. It is my understanding that the GAO letter never went out, so that leaves me in a difficult position here today. While I would like to work with you to address this issue, I need to be sure that we're doing what is in the best interest of the American taxpayers, and many of those concerns that both Mr. Waxman and I have laid out have not been adequately addressed, so I don't know how I can support that bill here today. However, I must give credit where credit's due, and the majority has worked with our side in addressing many of our concerns in the pipeline safety bill, and I am prepared to support that bill here today. However, this bill can and should be a model for future cooperation, for future legislation that comes before the subcommittee. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. At this time, I recognize the gentleman, Mr. Terry, for purposes of an opening statement.
Yeah, I just want to thank the gentleman for bringing this up. I think pipeline safety is a key concern, making sure that, as the chairman of the full committee said, learn from the incidences that have occurred, whether it's in Bruno or Yellowstone or his own district. One of the key areas that I want to focus on, Mr. Chairman, is response times. We should have a standard for response times. It should be one that's meetable, but it seems to me that the actual response times and the promised aren't matched very well. So just want to lay that out that we can continue to work on this, and appreciate you moving this bill. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Terry. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Michigan for the purpose of an opening statement, Mr. Dingell.
Chairman, I thank you for your courtesy. I commend you for this hearing, and I am delighted to commend you, the majority staff, my dear friend Mr. Upton, the chairman of the committee, for his extraordinary leadership on this matter, and also that of my dear friend Mr. Rush. We have worked together on this matter in a bipartisan fashion that does credit to the committee. And I'm pleased to report that this committee is continuing to show the leadership that it has shown over the years to assure that we make our pipelines as safe as we can in the interests of the public. And it should be noted that not only is there long-term effects in terms of the environment and the public health from a pipeline failure, but indeed they can function very much like an atom bomb, and you'll see a huge ball of fire when some of these things go off, with a lot of people being killed or injured and huge property losses. This is a good bill. It shows that this committee does know how to provide leadership, and I'm pleased to say that under the leadership of our friend Mr. Upton and others who have worked on this, and that includes the staffs on both sides of the aisle, we have done, I think, something very important in the public interest. I urge my colleagues to support the legislation and to help fend off any mischievous amendments so that we might come forward with a good bill and show this body how a good working legislative committee can function. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle. Mr. Griffith, do you seek recognition? Mr. Shimkus? Mr. Green, do you seek recognition for an opening statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling up the bill, and I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this effort by Chairman Upton, Ranking Member Waxman, and Ranking Member Emeritus Dingle. It's not an easy to craft a bipartisan bill, and I'm pleased that this important issue our committee is working on continuing in that legacy of bipartisanship. Markup by this subcommittee is an important first step toward improving pipeline safety regulations. Pipeline safety is one that's particularly important to me. I represent parts of Houston and East Harris County, Texas, where virtually everyone lives on or in close proximity to a natural gas or oil pipeline or even a refined product pipeline. I also have thousands of constituents who rely on the industry for employment and their livelihood. I understand the need to pass a bill that addresses the priorities of ensuring safety along these pipelines and providing regulatory certainty for the operators in the years ahead. However, I'm concerned that the bill falls short in too many important ways. I'm hoping that as this bill moves through our committee, the committee leadership carefully examines where I believe are much needed tweaks to the language. Particularly, I hope to pursue changes that would strengthen provisions in sections concerning offshore gathering lines, integrity management, incident notification, and clarify provisions relating to CO2 pipelines. The way this bill is written, it would have a profound impact on areas of the oil and gas industry, but many of these provisions offer no substantial additional protection to the residents or the workers. While I don't have any amendments at this point, I'm encouraged by the assurances by bipartisan sponsors of the bill that they're open to working with members of the committee to address our concerns as we head toward a full committee markup. I hope to take them up on this offer, and I anticipate a productive and engaging process. Overall, I believe the solid first step and good framework for this committee and the Transportation Infrastructure Committee to build upon as we move ahead. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to advance a bill that will protect the residents, the environment, and surely have a vibrant and competitive oil and gas industry. And I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Green. And that completes the opening statements. So the chair will call up the discussion draft and ask the clerk to report.
Discussion draft H.R. blank to amend Title 49 United States Code.
Without objection, the first reading of the draft is dispensed with, and the draft bill will be open for amendment at any point.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Chairman recognizes Mr. Upton for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will report the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of the substitute offered by Mr. Upton and Mr. Dingle.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
I would note that this is a very strong bipartisan amendment, myself and Mr. Dingle. It is a strong improvement over our discussion draft. We made a number of changes since our legislative hearing a couple weeks ago. And as I said in my opening statement, pipeline safety is a subject with long and bipartisan history. This substitute does a number of things. First of all, the amendment takes into account the recent pipeline incident in Montana and asks PHMSA to review its standards for pipelines that cross waterways. We add new requirements for confirming maximum allowable operating pressure, a regulatory shortfall that led directly to the disastrous pipeline explosion in San Bruno last year. We strengthen the language regarding leak detection standards to make sure adequate systems are utilized to detect and begin stopping pipeline leaks. We allow regulations of certain offshore gathering lines to ensure large lines in the Gulf remain safe. We modify language in the incident notification section to help prevent false alarms to the National Response Center. We still have probably a number of other improvements as we move forward. Now that we have the text to debate and to discuss today, I look forward to working with all members of the panel and yield my time to my good friend, the co-author of this, Mr. Dingle from the great state of Michigan. Mr. Dingle, I yield to you to comment on our amendment.
I thank you. All I can do is to repeat what I have said before about the fine leadership of our friend Mr. Upton on this matter and the high quality of the proposal before us. It meets the concerns that we all have with regard to pipeline safety. It takes care of real progress, and I think that it will serve this committee well as we go forward. And again, I want to commend all who have participated, including my friend Mr. Waxman, for his support and assistance as we have gone through this process. I urge my colleagues to support the substitute amendment that is offered by our good friend Mr. Upton, and yield back the balance of my time.
Yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. Is there further discussion of the substitute? The gentleman from Illinois is for what purpose do you seek recognition?
Last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I support this bipartisan manager's amendment. It significantly strengthens the discussion draft in several respects. The discussion draft only required PHMSA to study whether it should regulate gathering pipelines. The manager's amendment requires PHMSA to actually regulate offshore gathering lines and authorizes the agency to collect data on unregulated gathering lines. The discussion draft only required PHMSA to evaluate whether integrity management system requirements should be expanded beyond high consequence areas. The manager's amendment also requires PHMSA to promulgate regulations to expand these important protections to additional pipelines. The discussion draft did not require PHMSA to ensure the public availability of information about pipeline operator emergency response plans. The manager amendment includes that requirement. The discussion draft allows PHMSA to collect fees to conduct design safety reviews of proposed pipelines, but this was limited to the very small number of pipelines that cost at least $4 billion or that use new or novel technologies or designs. The manager's amendment reduces the threshold to $1 billion so that PHMSA has the resources it needs to review pipeline designs before the pipelines are actually built. The manager's amendment adds an important provision that addresses a regulatory weakness exposed by the San Bruno incident. This provision requires gas transmission pipeline operators to verify pipeline records to confirm the physical and operational characteristics of the pipeline as well as their established maximum allowable operating pressure. Operators also would be required to report any pipelines for which records cannot be verified and reconfirm their maximum allowable operating pressures. This provision applies to grandfathered pipelines constructed before July 1, 1970. At the legislative hearing, we heard testimony about the safety benefits of retrofitting existing pipelines with remote control or automatic shut-off valves. The discussion draft did not address this issue. The manager's amendment requires PHMSA to conduct an analysis of the cost, risks, and benefits of retrofitting existing transmission pipelines with automatic or remote control shut-off valves. The manager's amendment also directs PHMSA not only to require the use of leak detection systems for pipelines, but to set standards for the capability of these systems. That's an important advance. Finally, the manager's amendment includes a new section requiring PHMSA to evaluate whether current regulations regarding cover over buried pipeline and river crossings are sufficient to prevent a release of hazardous liquid. This provision is a starting point. As we learn more about the Yellowstone River spill, we may strengthen this section also. So, Mr. Chairman, this is a good amendment, and with a number of important improvements. And I know that several members have raised additional issues. As we move toward a full committee markup in September, I hope we can continue to work together in a cooperative way to address the concerns raised by our colleagues. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman. I want to thank the ranking member emeritus, Mr. Dingell. I want to thank the chairman of the full committee. I want to thank the and you, Mr. Chairman, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for all your work on this manager's amendment. It's a good amendment, and I encourage my colleagues to support it, and I encourage us to continue to work in a bipartisan manner as we provide legislation for the American people far into the future. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
We strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and apologize for being late to the committee. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the substitute amendment and where we're moving from here. Areas of Colorado are a spaghetti network of natural gas pipelines, and I think historically we've done a very good job of making sure that our pipelines are safe, and we can always do better. Colorado is home to the very promising Niobrara Shale Formation, which has the potential to create many jobs and to provide for increased natural gas usage across America. And I know there are other formations throughout the country that show tremendous promise as well. The Pipeline Safety Bill, the amendment in front of us, take into account the fact that in the future there will be vast exploration of these formations. It takes into account the construction and transmission issues that will come about as a result of increased exploration opportunities. It's important to Colorado and the natural gas industry in particular. But one area I wanted to highlight as we move forward on the bill today is the issue of gathering lines. Gathering system consists of pipelines that are smaller in diameter and operated at lower pressures than transmission lines, and often located in very rural or semi-rural areas. These are lines that operate throughout my district in eastern Colorado, southeastern, northeastern Colorado, a gathering system that helps move natural gas and liquids from wellhead to the transmission lines or to the processing plants. As the substitute amendment moves forward, I hope to work with the committee to see that the review of gathering systems reflects a risk-based analysis. Section 29 in particular, which requires a study of onshore gathering lines, might be improved so that it quantifies if and how applying existing regulations to the gathering system could effectively improve public safety. This kind of risk-benefit analysis is needed to provide meaningful context to a study of hundreds of thousands of gathering lines in Colorado and beyond. Without further discussion or analysis, I'm afraid there might be some unintended consequences, and look forward to working with you on this bipartisan effort and commend you on the work you've done in making this bill a bill that will improve the safety of pipelines across the country. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Does anyone else seek recognition to comment on the discussion amendment? For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek?
Strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Let me commend both sides at working at trying to do what the American people always say they want us to do and usually get nervous when they see us working together. Let me just say we've really addressed in this bill in so many ways what and how something should be built for a certain technology. I just ask that we build on this success and have both sides take a look at the fact that the one thing we don't do is talk about where we want our infrastructure to be sited. I don't care if it's gas, if it's oil, if it's water, if it's electrical power. The easements that we have in our urban areas are set aside and planned ahead of time. And with good planning and with a proactive approach at identifying the need for easements for these kind of facilities, we can not only help the economic prosperity of stimulating and making it easier to build the projects and get them done, but we also have the opportunity to make them environmentally much more responsible and accountable. So I'd just like to say that as we go on this, that this committee take a serious look at the fact that the idea that the FERC somehow allows private companies or requires private companies to figure out easements and work out every one of those alignments. I think that we see what we've done with the interstate freeway system. We've actually had not only the federal government will require states and local and council of governments to be engaged in finding the best easements for the best economic and the least economic impact, and ecological impact. And that proactive planning is good for the environment, good for the economy, and I think it's something that we need to grapple with. We do it for our freeways, Mr. Chairman. That is one part of our infrastructure. Oil, gas, water, and electricity is the other part. And it's sad when you see transmission systems having to be 2 or 3 times longer than what they ought to be with the economic and ecological impact, when good planning could streamline that and make it safer and cheaper and more compatible with the local communities. And I just hope that we raise to the challenge of building on this success, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bilbray. Does anyone else seek recognition to discuss the amendment of the substitute? Are there any other bipartisan amendments? Does anyone have any amendments? If there are no more amendments, then the vote occurs on the... If there are no more amendments, the vote occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Now, if there are no further amendments, the question now occurs on favorably reporting the discussion draft as amendment. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the discussion draft is favorably reported. The chair now calls up H.R. 2054, and before I ask the clerk to report, I want to have a little discussion here for a moment, so just a minute. I ask the clerk to report H.R. 2054.
H.R. 2054 to provide for the rearrangement.
All right, without objection, the first reading of the draft is dispensed with, and the draft bill will be open for amendment at any point, so ordered. The chair now recognizes himself for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute and asks the clerk to report the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2054 offered by Mr. Whitfield.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes in support of the amendment. As I indicated in my opening statement, this bill, and we have amended it in a few ways, basically is a mechanism to help us re-enrich depleted uranium tails at Paducah and Portsmouth, Kentucky. We have 60,000 14-ton canisters. It's costing the federal government over $4 million a year to maintain these canisters, and it presents environmental problems. This legislation would establish a pilot project that would allow the depleted tails to be re-enriched for a period of 2 years and to be sold over a period of 4 years. And the purpose of extending it out to 4 years is to not disrupt the domestic uranium market. As I indicated, the uranium that is enriched in the U.S., 92% of it comes from outside the country. Once we re-enrich this uranium in the pilot project, it will generate significant income for the Federal Government. This legislation directs that revenue that the Federal Government will attain by enriching these tails to the Decommissioning and Decontamination Fund, which is located at, handled at the Department of Energy for the purpose of cleanup and environmental issues at Portsmouth, at Paducah, and at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So that basically is what this legislation is all about. We're advocating this because there are 1,200 jobs at stake if the plant closes at Paducah. So this legislation really is a win-win. It helps us get rid of the canisters that's costing the government $4 million a year. It provides additional revenue for the Federal Government. It provides additional revenue for the Decontamination and Decommissioning Fund to help environmental cleanup at the 3 sites I located. And it also preserves 1,200 jobs at the Paducah plant. So, is there any discussion of this substitute amendment? The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose the manager's amendment and the underlying bill because I don't believe forcing the Department of Energy to enter into a sole source contract with USEC to enrich its uranium tails will yield the best deal for the American taxpayer. The manager's amendment does not correct the main flaws of the underlying bill. The primary problem is that it mandates a lack of competition. The amendment requires the Department of Energy to enter into a sole source contract for uranium enrichment with a uranium enrichment plant owned by DOE, and there's only one enrichment plant owned by DOE. That's USEC in Paducah, Kentucky. This anti-competitive approach is not likely to yield the best deal for the American taxpayers. Mr. Chairman, I have a longer statement, and I'd like to put that in the record, but I did want to express my view on this subject.
Without objection, this statement is entered into the record. Is there any further discussion on the amendment in the nature of a substitute? If there are no other discussion and if there are no other amendments, all those in favor of adopting the amendment in the nature of substitute shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. If there are no further amendments, the question now occurs on favorably reporting the discussion draft as, the bill as amended with the nature of substitute. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the bill as amendment is favorably reported. Without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the discussion draft and the bill approved by the subcommittee today. So ordered. The subcommittee will now stand adjourned. Thank you.